Hi, this is Caitlin McLean with KMKDesigns. This is our video today to show you how to make our Queen of Hearts skirt pattern. Now the pattern is available in our shop KMK Remnants and we will link it below. This is a pattern that we recommend for probably high beginners or intermediate sewers. This video is to help to be a companion. There is also notes on the pattern as well. Alright, to start out, we're showing you the very front of the pattern pieces, which are kind of the bumblebee parts. If you look at the Queen of Hearts skirt, it's black and yellow alternating. Here we've laid the pieces of fabric on top of each other. Now she is using washers to hold down the fabric pieces. You can also use pins. This is just a way that we find that makes it easier to keep the fabric down and using a cutter like a rolly cutter versus scissors, but either way is totally fine. Here we've laid the pieces of fabric on top of each other. Now you can either use Kona cotton, which is what we used, or you can use a satin, just really anything that doesn't have a stretch to it, or if you really have to use a fabric with a stretch, really interface it well. You can see here Angeline is laying out the pieces as economically on the fabric as possible to use up as little as she can. Now you do want to make sure that your grain line that is on your pattern pieces is following the grain line on your fabric. Now your grain line is parallel to your selvage edge, and these pieces, since they're diagonal, it's very important to make sure that the line that is marking the grain line on the pattern is parallel to your selvage. Otherwise your pieces, when you sew them together, are going to stretch weird. Fabric tends to stretch when it's on something called the bias, which is the diagonal. So it's just very important. As long as you just follow the line and make sure you're keeping it on the grain, you'll be good to go. Here you can see she's cutting out actually the same piece that's not separated, but it's the lining piece. So it's still that center front piece that's just going to go underneath. Basically, there are some pieces that are kind of like a pillow sandwiched together, so this is your lining piece. Here we're at the sewing machine putting those bumblebee pieces together. So if you line them up right and you got your seam allowances correct, they should all be even at all the ends and form just a big wide triangle when they're all put together. We generally sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Everything will be marked on the pattern which pieces go to what, and if any of the seam allowances are different than a 1/2 of an inch. We sped up part of the sewing too, just so that it wasn't too much sewing altogether, but I wanted to slow it down at a few points to see how she's lining them up so you can kind of get a feeling of how it's supposed to start to look as you're putting it together. You can see here she's holding up the final finished piece as one side of the triangle, and then they get sewn down the center front together. Now she's ironing them all with the yellow going towards the black. You don't want to do the black towards the yellow because the black will actually show through the yellow. It's just colors and cottons tend to do that. So you always want to have your darker colors, if you can, going in towards themselves so they don't show up in the seam. Here she's putting together the center front seams, making sure they line up well, checking them before pinning them together. Now you really do want to make sure you pin this. We've done them a couple times, so we tend not to pin them as much, but just if you're doing it the first time or you don't have as much experience sewing, it's really important to get those. She's kind of showing here how you line them up. They kind of line up a little off center at the seam, but then when they actually make the seam, it all lines up perfectly.
It can look like that. which is horrible. Ah! So sometimes it may not match quite perfectly when you line it up, and then you're left with slightly uneven fabric or something. You can either go back in, tighten up this, pull this fabric in a little bit, or you can just stretch it a little bit and force it to work. And then by the time you get to ironing, you can get it to lay flat again. If it's really off, this isn't going to work, and you're going to have to fix these seams. If it's only just a little bit off, because you can see how the black is a little bit poofed up, it's just a little bit. It's not going to be the end of the world. It's easy enough to fix with an iron later. So that's that.
And here it is all together when it's all completed, that first center front triangle. Now she's going to take it over and again iron the seams as best she can. What she's going to do is she's actually going to clip them before they start at the yellows so that she can still iron them so that the seam allowance is always on the black side and not the yellow side. So you can kind of see they zoom up in the picture here and show her doing that. So this just really makes sure you don't have any weird lines down your center front that you're going to see.
Because if you do, just do it onto the yellow, like that one. What you're going to get is this little line that you can kind of see compared to this, which is going to be no line, So once you back it in the black fabric, this will show up as an obnoxious line. This will look nice and clean. So this is what you want. That is not what you want.
This is piece number 11, which is basically the lining piece that goes underneath the black and yellow piece. This is the part I was talking about earlier where you're actually going to make a pillow. So first you want to seam the center front on this black piece so you have that line up the front. We use this center front seam kind of as an anchor point to guide to make sure that you're really in the middle for both pieces when you're pinning them together. Here she's showing you once you have it sewn together that you're going to iron that seam flat open, and then you're going to put those two pieces together, right sides together, and basically pillowcase, which just means you're going to put right sides together, pin it all around the edges, leaving just a small 2 to 3 inch gap at one seam. Usually we keep that gap away from the corners. It really doesn't matter where it is as long as it's not super near a corner. So you're going to go all around the edge at that 1/2 inch seam allowance and sew it all together. And then you're going to turn it inside out after that's done. It's basically going to make like a big pillowcase, but it's going to encase all those seams and make a really nice finished edge. A few other notes about putting it together is that if you did buy a fabric that maybe is slightly different than your yellow and black fabric, like for a lining fabric, it may stretch a little bit differently. So you want to make sure you use a lot of pins along the seam. You may need to do something called easing, which means if your whole line, if it's 1/8 or 1/4 inch off or even 1/2 inch off, you just need to spread out that difference among the seam, just using your pins to spread out any and ease kind of that extra fabric in. Now if you use the same kind of fabrics, it really shouldn't happen too much and be too big of a deal. Another thing when you're putting it after you put it all together, you need to make sure that you clip the corners to make sure there isn't a lot of excess fabric at your corners. We kind of clip it off 2 little triangles around the edge of the corner just to make sure when you're turning it inside out that your corner gets nice and crisp. Another note about those corners, when you are sewing them together, you do want to make sure that you're giving it a little bit of a back stitch at your corner. So you can see here as she gets to the corner, she goes back and forth just a little bit. This kind of anchors the point and makes sure when you're clipping it that you're not getting a hole in that corner, that it's very sturdy and it can put up with you turning it inside out and making sure that it's very crisp and clean.
Corners like that. Off. There's less junk in your corner.
At this point, she's showing you how to kind of turn in the corner and showing you how to get it really nice and crisp.
So like in that area. I got a point. So.
Now here it is all done, laid out on the table, just showing you kind of how it is supposed to look when it's all done. It's all enclosed except for just that top little part. It's all finished, lined, and ready to go for the next steps. Here she's showing you how the white overlay works. So on the pattern pieces, it's marked where the white is going to overlay, and you're going to go in with a fabric marker, a marker that is going to disappear either with water, ironing. You can also use fabric chalk, that can work well too, or even pins if you don't have anything on hand.
This one is roughly just a 1/2 inch in on this, which you can see on the yellow because it's a horrible little line right here. So this will be where your stitch in the ditch happens. That happens with the white panel. It's going to be going all the way down. So it'll reach to here, but it'll get stitched down here so it can come out a little bit.
Here Angeline is explaining how to cut out the red and black fashion part. So I'm actually going to let her go ahead and explain how we're marking those and how those are all going together in the cutting part and how they are marked.
So now we've got the black and red that we're cutting out. We're going to focus on the black and then just use it as a pattern piece for the red just because, we're cheap. So we got 7, which has a grain line of doing it this way. So follow the grain line when you're doing it. It's just another little additional piece that's towards the front. It'll make sense once it's all together. What you can see down here is that there's different lengths that you're going to. So you're following the one that says cut here, black and red, and it points to this point. What you're doing is creating a seam allowance that will in the end equal out to this piece, because you're cutting a lining entirely out of this piece, and then they're going to match up at the end. But for now, the black and the red only goes down to this large dotted line at the bottom. So what I did was just chalk it out. You can also just cut along the small dotted line and add a 1/2 inch this way and add a 1/2 inch that way, depending on which piece you're cutting out. There's that option too if you don't want to keep doing this and chalking your way across. So just cut this out. We've also marked the pattern piece with 2 little lines right here, which is what matches up with the white, which also has the 2 little lines. So these pieces in the end get put together, which creates that white stripe down the front of her dress, which is number 6, and we'll use that eventually. So let's just get this little play out fast. So we get the next part. And you can just knock little notches, the 2 notches in that, and the 1 notch into this. Because this one corresponds to this notch on the 3 pieces that get cut out of this. Because this you can either do as a full circle, depending on if your fabric actually allows for that, or since we're working with smaller amounts of fabric and making it work, we're going to piece them together like how this is showing, that you just kind of twist them, make them fit, follow the grain line. Markings. I can do words. The table has so many little spots in it. But that deals with that. These ones, you can just start cutting them out. What I'm starting with is number 10. As you can see, the grain line for number 10 is this one. This is the one that's basically making, this is where your zipper will be in number 10, because this is the straight line. There's no pull or weave that's going to happen here compared to other pieces. When you start twisting it and turning it, there'll be weird stretch areas. This is a nice straight piece to be adding your zipper to. Once again, you're stopping here. You're following the one that says cut here, red and black. So you got a little spot here. There's more. You can just, like, you know, jam a pin through and follow your pins. You can...
As you see her talking, she's just going back over to make sure that you're following the lines on the pattern that say cut here for red and black. So you're cutting basically for all those pieces, lining pieces, which are in the end cut longer than your fashion pieces, because the fashion piece, if you look at the Queen of Hearts skirt, has the red and black, and then it has that white band around it, and then it also has the triangle in the middle. So anywhere that it says cut here for red and black, you want to just follow those lines.
And then this piece is going to spin. Let's get this cut out. So what you're doing is creating a full circle without... You're piecing it back together, basically. If you got 60-inch wide fabric, certainly just stick it back together, cut out a giant circle, and it's fine. But we've got this short 45 fabric. It can work if you want. If you're shorter, this one's just the waist floor makes it a little bit more difficult. So you want to straighten out your fabric again. I'm sorry, I'm making you stand there forever. Straighten out the fabric. And what you're doing is following the next grade for number 9. Stick it in here, and you want to make sure this is straight. A little bit more like that. Don't fall off the paper anywhere. Don't fall off the fabric anywhere. And these can fit easily on small. You know, you can get the full circle out of them because they are only to here. So they are pretty short. It's not like you're going all the way here. It's mostly just you're going all the way here for the white lining. So you can just do the full circle if you want to save on the seam allowance. But I'm just going to do it like this because some of you might have very small fabric that you're working with. And this is just to show you what you have to do if you're stuck with small fabric. Or if you find some specialty fabric or something crazy, this is the way to deal with it. If you also don't want to use that thing, you can just use your piece that you fought it cut out. Just use that.
Angeline is showing you a trick right here is once you cut out one of your red or black pieces that has that line that's different than your big pattern, you can use that piece as your pattern piece to cut out your other pieces. It will make it just cut a little time. If you don't feel comfortable using that, you don't have to either.
That'll make you number 9.
Just a heads up, some of the fabric we're using in this video is a 54 wide or 60 wide fabric. A lot of Kona cotton comes in a 45 width fabric, so you may have to move your circle a little bit and change and alter your pattern a little bit to fit your fabric. We tried to make it as comprehensible as possible to use on different fabrics. Like this fabric here, you can see fits pretty fine. But if you're using a lining fabric and you don't want it to be confusing, just buy a fabric that is 54 or 60 wide for your lining. For the outside fabrics, a 45 wide fabric should be sufficient because the bottom of the circle that you're making the skirt out of is actually that white band, so your fabric doesn't have to be as wide for your fashion pieces.
This is the idea that if you have a perfectly good enough piece, you can make it work as just a full circle instead of making 3 little bits and even making this 4th little bit. This is where that one connects up eventually and gets cut off to there. So it's not quite a full half circle because it's partially open at the front of the dress. So you can turn it back into its basic format of just combining these 4 pieces back together again to make a giant circle. You just have to stay consistent and do this for everything because you lose the seam allowance. You have to take out the seam allowance, put it back together again. So that's a half-inch seam allowance on everything. I'm just going to keep cutting them out in these chunks because they're easier to print that way to make it more convenient. And this is how we're going to do it. Basically, we've got number 10, which, as expressed before, is you gotta follow the grade lines because this is how they'll all go back together again. So you've got the back, which is where the zipper is, which is on number 10. You've got the side back, which correlates to the side back, number 9, because 9's grain is now also, this is how the grain line is going on that one. This is how the grain line is going on that one. This is how the grain line is going on that one. Which looks weird when it's in this magical, mystical, turning astrices. But this is what it looks like. So these two go together. So those are together. These two go together. So those are together. So it all makes sense because 10, 9, 8. And then you repeat it on red. You want to make sure you do it all right.
Why is this important? It's important because fabric tends to stretch at what different angle it is cut. So if you cut a fabric at a 45-degree angle, it tends to stretch a lot more than you're cutting it parallel to your grain line. I know that can seem a little confusing. That's why she's drawing it out here. So she's drawing out kind of how the grain line should line up on all these pieces to make sure that you're not going to get any weird warping. Here Angeline is cutting out the lining for the top pieces, so the red, black, and white. We chose white just because at the bottom piece, if you choose a darker fabric for your lining, it's going to show up potentially, depending how thick your white fabric is at the bottom of your skirt. So even though you use a black lining for that yellow and black piece, it may be a good idea to use white lining for the rest of your skirt. Now this isn't absolutely necessary, it's just something we've noticed after making this skirt that just makes the final result usually look a little bit more refined. She's just showing you here some ways you can lay out your pieces. She also has that front piece that's going to go right along your black and yellow piece. Also, don't mind me being awkward in the background.
This piece is a number 6 piece, as you can see there. It's the little front piece that goes down her skirt. So I'm gonna make that one there. We just draw it out. Once again, following the grain line. This is the grain. I'm following it. Sorry, I'm like moved closer to the camera because I hate you, apparently. And then you just get another one out there, and then eventually you'll just flip it and get its friend somewhere else. So the idea is this is the grain, and then you'll need the other side of the skirt. So at the end, you'll have a triangle open here that goes to the green, yellow thing. So, yep, just cut them out.
Here's a video of her sewing all the lining pieces together, as well as that front white piece with its lining and its final fashion piece on the outside. After she's done putting the lining together, she sews up the center back to a certain point. She's going to leave a little bit of it open in the lining, so when the zipper undoes, then you have a space open. She's just doing a hem right here. She's also saying that you can just leave it at the selvage if you like.
Narrowing that down, and you've got your zipper will be here, and then this will be on the lining.
Here she's sewing the sewing together of the white front band. So this is the band that goes right next to the black and yellow pieces. It's going to go right down the front. Now part of these front pieces are actually getting sewn together, so it's going to create a finished edge. So she's going to sew together those pieces, those part of the pieces first. So basically you're going to have 2 of each side. You're going to sew them together and then turn them around. She's now finished putting the lining all together, and she's making a note to iron all your seams. Ironing throughout your project is always super important, so make sure you don't forget to do that. Right here she's showing you that the pieces 7, 8, 9, 10 are the same pieces for the red and the black, and that's why it's so important to mirror them. So they're technically the same pieces, just one side's cut of red, one side's cut of black. It's really good to write the numbers of the pattern piece on. It will make following the video easier and just making sure that you don't flip pieces or put pieces in the wrong spot. So even though we had the black pre-made before we started recording, we're going to show you throughout piecing the red one. So you can kind of get a handle of all the pieces. As you can see, she's written up, she's written front and side front for the seams. She's made sure that all of the pieces are really easy to understand which direction they're going, what pieces are going together. All your pieces are going to look very similar, so it can really help just to mark them with chalk. Chalk or a marker that is made for fabric that goes away with water can be a really good tool for this. So she's just showing you here that to press open the seams is really important. It's going to make the circle on your skirt look really smooth and even. This part shows how to cut the bottom of the skirt, that white band that goes all the way around. Now you can't just cut a white strip, it wouldn't work correctly. You actually have to use the bottom of the circle. So we suggest just cutting off that pattern piece along the bottom and then lining it up on your pieces. You're still going to want to follow the seams. It's important to try to not cut it all out in one piece. Just like when cutting out the red and black and the lining, you want to make sure you follow those grain lines. If you don't follow the grain lines, the pieces can kind of get warped and twisted and you can get weird diagonal lines sometimes, or they can just sew together incorrectly. So just make sure you follow the grain line on the pattern piece and make sure it lines up correctly on your fabric. This next part just shows sewing together that big white band at the bottom that we just cut out. Again, you want to make sure you mirror the pieces, otherwise you're going to have two pieces the same way and your skirt won't go together correctly.
Mystical magical 8-ball.
Kristen's trying to sabotage
Will
the
everybody
video.
make this dress beautifully?
As I see it, yes.
That's 10, 9, 8, 7, 7 short. And you want 7, 8, 9, touch 10.
So once you have your two white sides, so your big half circles in white, but just the band around the bottom, you're going to put your two 10 pieces together. So you're going to close up your center back seam, basically. Alright, it's time now to put in your invisible zipper in your center back seam. You don't know how to put in an invisible zipper, a normal zipper is fine. You at least want it 10 inches long, a little longer might be better, just to be able to get it over your head. Now, because your skirt is one side red, one side black, you're putting your zipper into one side of it red and the other side black. Here she's closing up the seam below the zipper. If you've never done this before, there's a bunch of tutorials, I believe probably on YouTube, on how to finish up a seam after you put in an invisible zipper. But basically, you're just going to use it's great to use like a zipper foot, or if you have a machine whose needle can be moved over, so you can get right up next to your invisible zipper and make a really nice clean seam, and then seam it all the way down. So now comes the part of putting the white band onto the black and red. Now she's kind of talking here how it really should be pretty intuitive, like 7 white goes to 7 black, 8 red goes to 8 red. So if you have your pieces marked, or you at least have your pattern pieces around, you should really be able to line up those pieces perfectly where they go. Your seams are going to match up. If they're not matching up, you don't have it in the right place, and you're just going to sew it all the way around the bottom. You want to make sure that you iron the seam allowance up, because otherwise you're going to get a weird line. Again, like we were talking about when you're doing the yellow and black, just because the fabrics tend to be more sheer when they're lighter colored, you don't want your seam allowance to show. Now it's time to deal with that front white band. So you can see here she has it together, so it has that finished seam that's going to be facing towards the outside, and then the 2 raw edges that are going to be connected to the black and the red parts. As you can see, as Angeline is pinning it, it's going to go all the way down to your white band. So it's not only going to go right next to and seam to your black and your red, but it's also going to seam and enclose that raw edge of your black and white. So now both sides of the center front will have a white line down the center that meets up with the one on the bottom. Next, you're going to take the lining of the skirt that you've already created, and you're going to attach it to the black and red and white piece, pinning all of the right sides together around the seams and matching the centers and seams all the way around. They can be your guiding points as you stitch it all together. So after you stitch all the lining and the fashion together, you are going to do something called understitching. You can look it up. A short explanation is that you're actually going to open up that seam you just stitched, push all the seam allowance to the lining side, and stitch right next to the edge on the lining side. Once you've sewn it all together, leaving the waist open, you can turn it inside out. Before you do that though, you want to make sure you clip the seams, because that will help you get a nice refined edge. Then after that, you're going to iron all the way around so you can get a nice clean edge between the lining and the fashion. After that is the final step of sewing in the bumblebee black and yellow panel.
Might be a little bit confusing on the instructions, but what you're doing is stitching in the ditch in between the white and the red. Just catch the black and the yellow by a ½ inch, which is, there. So it's a little pinning project.
So just to recap what Angeline said in there is that you're going to stitch in the ditch between the white band and the red and the black. So you're going to pin your black and yellow pieces a 1/2 inch seam allowance from that line all the way down, and then you're going to stitch in the ditch to connect them. Now at the final bit, you are making sure that the white lines up the same on both sides when you're pinning them up so that you have the same distance of a little bit of yellow and black at the top. And this may vary if you've altered the size a little bit. You just really want to make sure that it is the same on both sides. Then once you have it all pinned, you're going to stitch in the ditch right where she was pointing. So you are going to follow the line. You want to make sure nothing underneath is curling up or anything. The pinning will really help with that. You can see she's kind of checking to make sure that it's all lining up right before she puts and stitches it in the machine. And then once you have it all stitched down, it will be all connected and you'll have that stitch line on the inside along that black and yellow piece. Now the final part is going to be the waistband. You want to line up all the edges at the top. These are the parts that should have been left open when you were sewing everything together. So they will be raw edges. So you're going to pin them all together to make sure that everything lines up correctly. Once you have them all pinned together, it's not a bad idea to do just a basting stitch around the top to make sure everything is secure. So when you're adding the waistband, the layers don't shift.
Okay, it's a 3-inch waistband. I decided to make it half black and half red because I can. You can too, if you want.
Once you've stitched it all the way around, you're going to take it out of the machine and you're going to leave a little excess on one of the sides, about 3 inches on the left hand side, then cut off the extra. And then on the other side, you're going to leave a 1/2 inch and cut off the extra. To finish the waistband, you're going to take that right side and you're going to fold that excess back into the waistband so that you're even with the edge of your skirt. Then you're going to take the top of the waistband and fold it down just a little bit. It's about 3/8, or if you serged your waistband, it's going to be about at that serge line, then folding it half. Then on the other side, you fold that 3 inches in half so it becomes 1.5 inches. And then you do the same thing with the top. We're going to fold it down a little bit. It's at 3/8 and then fold it in half. It may not be a bad idea to also iron this and do this all the way around the top of the waistband. This just makes it a little bit easier. You can also pin it when you do this because you're going to be top stitching in the next step, and that makes it a little easier to hold it in place. So Angeline here just pinned a few places in the skirt because she does skirt waistbands all the time. Then she's going to go and do that top stitching to secure all the layers together and basically is making a channel for where the elastic is going to go. She's going to be top stitching at a little bit in between a 1/16 and 1/4 of an inch, keeping pretty consistent just right along that edge, making sure you catch all through the layers. All right, we're almost there, guys. Now we're going to thread the elastic in. Generally, we suggest measuring elastic to your waist and subtracting 4 inches. This can vary a little bit. Good thing is just to put a piece of elastic around your waist to where it's comfortable, maybe a little tighter than where it's comfortable because the skirt's going to be pretty heavy. It gets a lot of fabric. And then cutting that, you can always take it in a little bit more. It's not that hard to adjust. And then we take a diaper pin. It doesn't come undone. You can also use a regular safety pin and kind of thread it through that waistband channel that you just created. Once you've done that, pin the elastic on either side, and then you're going to stitch through the elastic so that you don't lose the elastic back into that channel, because it will want to. It's going to be smaller than your waistband. It's going to create that kind of gathering and shearing look, and you want to make sure that it's nice and sturdy and won't come out. Now, if everything went to plan, your edges of the top of the skirt should line up really well. Zip it up and then sew on a hook and eye, and you're done. You can wear this skirt with a hoop or a big petticoat.